Blackberries by Roger Clarke. Edward arranged the soldiers rank and file in scattered lines on the grass, all advanced, acting under orders, while he provided many blood-curdling and realistic battle cries and death screams. They moved relentlessly in the push for the monastery, without air cover or tank support, bravely and with speed. Edward began to find their range with his spring howitzer. A devastating volley of matchsticks began falling on their heads to destroy them utterly and kill morale. Boom! He knew it was probably against the Geneva Convention to use such weapons against troops, but he had no scruples. Some things just had to be done, and this was war. Anyhow, at least he wasn't using his water pistol. Edward was sitting on the big lawn behind the house. Trucks, lorries, special vehicles, tanks and plastic soldiers were all spread out before him like a picnic. It was a hot afternoon for late summer, with the sun still trying its hardest. The heat was ponderous and the haze gathered its thoughts in distance. Edward fired off more matchsticks and then the missiles, which he picked up and reloaded. It was so easy to kill them off. However, it was not long before he tired of such delicate and exacting methods of slaughter, and reached over to take his red-pot cricket bat, jumping up, tucking the spatulate end into the side and aiming carelessly. A deathly rattle from his throat breech, hack, 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 and that was enough. He sneered at the slain with godlike triumph, amused to see them fall into the grass. Running up to the troops like a footballer, he gave an almighty kick which sent them everywhere and into the flower beds. "No prisoners!" he shouted. "Fix bayonets!" He looked around to check his position and was suddenly aware that a branch moved in the azaleas to his right. A sniper! Must have got a bead on his cigarettes, had to hit the dirt. He rolled over several times and took aim. Momentarily the sun caught in his eye and he was dazzled white. He blinked several times and his vision began to trickle back in a tone of sepia. There was movement all right, but it was nothing in the bushes as he had supposed. A figure was emerging from beside the crisp-cut yew hedge to his left. It was Charlie. Fancy him creeping up like that, cunning and quiet like a spy. Some friend to crawl along out of sight. "What are you doing, trying to sneak up and frighten me?" Edward demanded, rapidly getting to his feet in case Charlie should take a run at him when he was vulnerable. "Worried about being frightened? That's how you get shot." Charlie, hands bulging in his trouser pockets, began a slow, ambiguous saunter over the short distance to where Edward stood ready for him. But he neither said nor did a thing. Dispassionately, but like a connoisseur, he eyed the carnage of the battle spread about. He nosed at a truck with his foot. Edward looked baffled. He did not seem to want to fight. "How odd," said Charlie in theatrical manner as he stooped to retrieve a soldier without a head, holding it up with two fingers like something dainty. "You think I was spying, do you not?" he went on seriously. "Well, I'll tell you. I wasn't, so that is it." His voice was very smooth and sure. "But I have heard that another's eyes are even now upon you." Edward looked instinctively towards the cake-white Palladian house at the end of the lawn, but could discern no face at any window. Only squares of blank glass with oblique white reflections in each one. "She's washing leaks and looking out," said Charlie. "The basin is all full of grit and slugs." "You're a slug." Edward snatched the headless soldier from Charlie's hand. "Leek and potato soup, that's the first course." "What course, slug?" "For your dinner, Dumbo, or should I say, John's dinner, since it is for him when he comes tomorrow." "No, it isn't John's dinner." Jolly for you, Ed, having a new dad. Is it Christmas, I asked. Edward did not think it was on to tease people about their parents. That was what they always felt at school. Charlie ought to know better. It doesn't matter, retorted Edward airily. It isn't as if my mother can marry someone else, is it? She's allowed friends. She can't marry John, so that's all right. Of course she can. Your father is dead. But she is still married to him. Look, he's dead. He's in a coffin. He's filed underground in the great filing cabinet of the world. He's gone. I mean, permanently gone, right? She can marry anyone she likes. No. She can go to an airport and say, right, I'll have him. Edward threw a very hard punch, but it missed. It would have thrown another, but Charlie was beginning to walk away. Let him go. What is the worry? Said Charlie from near the yew hedge. You can get used to him. You can get used to anything in time, even torture. No, said Edward desperately. No, I won't get used to him. He's not my father. I won't get. Make your mother happy for a change. How nice. Stop her hating you just once. She doesn't hate me. She does, old man. You are getting in the way of her remarriage. Be sensible. Compromise. He'll give you presents. You'd better go, said Edward stiffly. And indeed Charlie seemed entirely to vanish, to dissolve into an expanse of colour. Edward! The sound was unmistakable, 2 long, drawn-out syllables coming across the daisied lawn. Edward! He lay flat on the ground and tried to turn green to merge in. She would want him to do something for her. Are you doing anything? She would say, knowing full well that he was. Lay the table, dig the potatoes. I can see you, Edward. Edward peered through the figures with which he covered his face and realised she probably could. He got up grudgingly, bits of grass stuck to his clothes. Hurry up and come here a minute. The soldiers he left in rotting heaps, the lorries he abandoned to belch their tarry smoke and explode. He went round to the front. He preferred the front of the house because it had a huge white staircase, which reminded him of history and carriages. If he went through the grand door, perhaps the footman, missing for so long, would suddenly appear and bow for his gloves. All the doors of all the rooms were open, and so were the windows, to let in what little air there was. Sunlight wallowed in the wood-polished, ormolu-clocked atmosphere of the ancient lime-green walls. To get to the kitchen meant a trip through the servants' quarters, which were very dim, quite cool, and with a sadness somehow accentuated by the plain glassy tiles. Even before he got there, Edward could hear his mother splashing water about as she washed the vegetables to get the garden out of them. She sliced off the tousled roots. As Edward entered the room, she did not turn round. Are you doing anything? She said. Only playing, Edward replied. With whom? By yourself? No, with Charlie. Charlie who? Charlie, I don't know his other name. She turned to examine him, coolly, in a superior way. She picked at the ends of her rubber gloves, and they made a wet, snapping noise. The way she looked, Edward might have been a side of bacon. You mean you didn't ask, she said, in a what an imbecile for a son voice. How could you be playing with a boy, and you don't even know his name? You are truly absurd. You are just saying this to make me angry because you know it does. Of course you have his name. I do not. She put her hand to her head as if she had a headache and heaved a huge sigh of weary exasperation. Now what Charleses are there nearby? Charles Stock, Charles Randolph? She was talking to herself now. Perhaps he should tell her all about Charlie. She would have a fit. He smiled cleverly in the knowledge of his power over her. She turned to him again. Where is his address? Nowhere, said Edward. Never Never Land, I might have guessed it too. Yet another ghostly companion. Another Peter Pan. No, Charlie. Why do you persistently lie to me, Edward? I don't lie. Is it better to have a liar or a lunatic as a son, I wonder? Charlie is real, and I like him. She splashed the water in increasing agitation, and some went on the floor. It doesn't really matter. Choose who you like to be your friends. Make up all the ones you want. You won't get them any other way. When I remembered how you treated those children I invited over, it is just too much. And what their mothers must have thought of me. Edward's mother had invited a batch of about 12, with only their age in common, to a Sunday tea, in the vague hope that they would play together. Edward had suggested cowboys and Indians, which was generally approved, and they managed to tie the girls to trees quite far from the house so that they could not shout for help. The boys had left them there, mewing and boo-hooing and yelling for help, although he had explained it was no good doing so. The boys, strutting with their success, agreed on pirates next. He got them all into the boat on the lake and gave it a great push-off with the oars. Charlie appeared and they had a long laugh. I suppose, his mother was saying, you are too silly and immature to get on sensibly with other people. Not that it makes it any easier for me, but I do not suppose you think about that. Edward stared at the plates on the dresser. They had a blue geometry that circled round and round like a bicycle wheel. Perhaps no one else is good enough for you, is that it? Now she was getting brisk and tight-lipped in one of her starchy moods when anything he said would be wrong. He wanted to leave, but he knew she would love him to do that. He would never hear the end of it. Another tales of my dreadful child to astonish and enthrall one's drinks party guests. Other parents might nod in deep sympathy. How was he going to get out of this? Perhaps he should try to tell the truth. That's what she always said he ought to do. Make her understand everything. He spoke with hesitation. I just don't like everyone. The lecturing tone switched in immediately. We all, she said in a sage way, must be prepared to make sacrifices, Edward. If we do not enjoy the social life, we must at least be civil and polite to others. It is simply a question of being considerate. It isn't much to ask. You, on the other hand, cannot even bother yourself with common courtesy. No, said Edward. She was so stupid it was funny. You dislike John, and you make no effort to hide it. She was really getting steamed up now. No, said Edward, with an infuriating grin. You are so abominably rude to everyone. It is an embarrassment to be your mother. There is no excuse for it but childish tantrums. John has offered to come and watch your football and take you out to tea from school. Shortcake in an empty resort cafe overlooking a dismal Channel sea swell. He's tried very hard to be friendly to you. He has even tried to be a father to you. Edward had been standing all the time as if in the dock, but now he moved over to the table, took out a chair, sat down, and stared suddenly down at his shoes. There is, he said quietly, no need for him to do that. His mother laughed, misunderstanding. School meals can't be that bad then. School is all right. Perhaps, she said in a clever voice, you should stay there through the holidays, since you like it so much. But no one else would be there. It would be empty. That would be no fun. Oh, thank you, your worship. So home isn't so bad after all. His mother, to Edward's great surprise, seemed genuinely pleased. Her tone softened. I am making dinner for tomorrow night when John comes, she said. It will be only us three. Edward decided to anticipate her. What do you want me to do? Would you go to Barley Lane and pick me a basketful of blackberries? I shall make ice cream and freeze it overnight. You'll like that. But that's miles. It will take me hours. Blackberries are stupid to have for pudding. It is certainly not stupid, Edward. John told me he liked them, so we shall have them, whether you want to or not. You can have bread and cheese. Blackberries, stupid, sour, pippy things. That was her funeral if she wanted them. He didn't want them. John. The best blackberries, said Edward informatively, are at Dodpit's. I've seen them. No, darling, I am told the Barley Lane crop are especially fine this year. Will you go there, please, like a good boy? They are better at Dodpit's, he repeated firmly. She left the sink and came nearer to concentrate on him. She still had a knife in her hand. She looked very angry. I have told you before that Dodpit's is unsafe and out of bounds. Of course you have been there. You never take any notice of what I tell you. It would have served you right if you had fallen and broken something. Now you will go to Barley Lane, and that is final. If you want nice blackberries, he retorted indignantly, then you should let me go to Dodpit's. But since I am not eating them, it doesn't bother me if they are horrible. You cannot resist the temptation to make life more difficult for me, can you? You have eaten them before now. Yes, and now I have changed my mind. I am allowed to change my mind. From now on I hate them, and they make me sick. You will eat what you are given and be grateful. Just think of all the people who are starving. The words remained unsaid. The two were glaring at each other, each trying to superimpose their will upon the other in a terrible, mute battle. I don't suppose, his mother hissed, that this urge to go to Dodpit's has anything to do with the dead crows on the fence outside Barley Lane. Edward's heart sank, she knew. He must have told her once. She laughed victoriously when she saw the change in his face. Ah, you poor darling, she cried, so frightened of such silly dead things. Frightened like a girl. I ought to tie your hair in ribbons. Edward felt such utter anger he wanted to hit her. He wanted to tell her exactly what he thought of her in the way she always told him what she thought of him. I am going to Dodpit's, mother. His voice was winter cold. He about turned and began to march away towards the garden. Through his daze, he was aware that his mother was running after him, waving and shaking her hands, shouting at him. Then beware of the dead man who lives at Dodpit's, she was yelling insanely. He feels like a slug and moves like a worm. His eyes have fallen out, but he can still smell you a mile off. He crawls along the ground out of his hole in the earth lined with tombstones and sheep guts, and he will slither up behind you when you aren't looking, and suddenly you will feel his dead grey fingers crunching your leg bones, and then he will drag you away too. She had stopped at the back door, and her voice was fading away as Edward crossed the garden. Barley Lane was about half a mile away, across a road and some fields. Dodpit's was just past it, farther on. Edward walked through a particularly large meadow full of yellow flowers and smelling sweet as tea. He was aware of a great summery heat bubbling all about him. He could not think much, his mind hardly seemed to be working. The sky above was so wide, the clouds pulled out in a thin gauze up very high. After that hedge ended there in a little distance, it would curve inwards and be replaced by a wire fence. The entrance of Barley Lane was kept by an odd metal turnstile to keep animals out. The crows, when he smelt them, when he saw them, made no difference. 5 reeking little bundles of black feathers sticking to exposed bone were gibbeted from the fence beside the entrance to Barley Lane. The weight of their bodies had stretched their necks into a long strand of grey steel cable, which pressure had made their beaks open in a permanent stinking core of defiance. Edward felt a little light-headed and sick at their presence, but they no longer seemed to worry him. Certainly they were not the reason he walked without hesitation straight past Barley Lane. Dod Pits had been a quarry for limestone since the Industrial Revolution and had been abandoned for 50 years. It was supposed to be dangerous, full of potholes and crumbling rock, and there were notices everywhere saying, "Danger, keep out." There was a path down to its dark hollow, and that was where the blackberries grew. Its entrance was gated and chained up. When you got over the gate, you had to be careful of the barbed wire twisted around the top bar as a vicious afterthought. Everything clattered and the chains jangled as Edward traversed the barricade. The Dog Pit's path was a steady slope down. It wound round and round in a series of concentric circles until it reached the quarry itself. Everything there was unkempt and unused. The path was almost overgrown. The blackberry bushes had nearly closed the gap between them, and knee-length grass marked what had once been a busy thoroughfare. There was a curious, claustrophobic atmosphere in the path, a kind of muffled dreaminess brought on by the sun, the lazy chalkland blue butterflies, and mostly by the huge walls of vigorously growing bramble that towered about 7 feet on either side. It was really too early for blackberries, but he could find them if he tried hard enough. The plants were at several stages at once. There were still many flowers, but some were faded or wilted, their loosened petals fluttering down upon him and sticking to his hair and clothes. Many blackberries were green and skinny or reddish-purple, wizened and bristled like old men. A few were just right. Some were gouty, overweight pot-whiners who burst in your hand and stain them mauve. On the way out of the kitchen he had grabbed a cardboard basket with a tin handle of the type commonly used for fruit picking, and now he began to fill it with a slow but steady supply. They made a pleasing noise as they hit the base of the basket, tap, tap. After a while the bottom was filled up with fruit, and it did not make the same sound. When he had picked a fair number, he stopped for a moment to look around. For a blissful while he had been totally absorbed in his task without a care. He had barely noticed his steady progress along the path, and by now he was quite deeply into dog pits. The brambles were just as high, but it was now somewhat darker because of the descent towards the quarry. The plants were just as argumentative, scratching at his hand and refusing to let go of a blackberry. Edward stooped to lift up the canopy of leaves near the ground, where there were often the most to be discovered. As he looked up again, to his great surprise, he saw someone standing not very far away from him, almost obscured by the next bend. Edward did not recognise him. He was quite tall, dressed in a long and tattered coat, with a broad-rimmed black velvet hat. Edward felt a bit annoyed that someone else was there, destroying the welcome solitude. It was strange the way he just stood there, not moving, staring at a sandy bank full of rabbit holes. What was so interesting about rabbits? He must be a professor of rabbitology. Maybe he was doing rabbits for TV like David Attenborough. Of course, they were great friends, shared notes. Maybe he could get him David Attenborough's autograph. Maybe he was the dead man. He didn't know it was the dead man. He couldn't know for sure. Why did he have to go and think that? Could be anyone at all. He could clear it up by going up to him and seeing who he was. He could do that. What if it was the dead man? What then? There would be no chance of escape. He would be in his hands. Of course, he could just turn around and slip back out of the lane without any fuss. No need to go up to the strange tall man with the hat. Quietly work his way back up the path. He had enough blackberries to pass off. He could say he could not find any more. Hopefully his mother would taste the dod pits in them. But as he was preparing to leave, something very disturbing happened. He glimpsed something very small and pink in one of the rabbit holes. The man must be looking at it. As he looked, Edward saw it was a rabbit, bald and bloated through the ravages of myxomatosis. Edward saw then that the man wore no socks. He wore no shoes. His feet were an ugly whiteness against the ground. Now the man cocked his head as if to listen. He tested the air, smelling it like a fox. He knew Edward was there behind him. He was the dead man. Edward almost dropped the basket in fright as he began to run back the way he had come. He did not know how far it was. All he knew was that he had to run and get out of there as quickly as he could. His clothes kept catching upon thorns. The leaves of the bushes rustled and rustled more than they needed to as he ran past, as if they were trying to give him away. And the grass swished at his feet and slowed him down. All this noise and commotion would give him away. The dead man must have heard by now and would be after him in a flash. Because the path was a spiral, there was always a corner which you never came round. There was always somewhere out of sight, something you could not see. Round and round went Edward. He was becoming dizzy as well as out of breath, and was beginning to get a great moaning stitch in his side. It was farther than he thought, the entrance. He would have to slow down soon, whether he liked it or not. He was becoming exhausted. He looked over his shoulder and could see nothing in pursuit. He began to trot, then to walk. Then he stopped altogether, panting. But the noise of his flight did not stop when he did. It continued in a swishing, boiling rush that grew louder and louder as whatever it was moving at speed through the undergrowth came towards him. Edward began a tired, terrified run once more. This all had been a trap. He felt he was in a lobster pot, a labyrinth, a working nightmare of a hot summer day with the cliffs of bramble rising dense and high all around him. So high, he felt that they would topple inwards and the weight crush him. And although he was running still on and on, he was unwilling to go too fast, because any moment could reveal the dead man waiting before him, with arms open wide to snap shut, and every flagging footstep might have the dead man clutching at his heels. He pushed himself on and on and on in a terrible monotony, and still he came no nearer an escape. The path seemed a complete circle. Was it his imagination, or was there no longer a slope to climb? He stopped for a second without realising what he was doing, and after he had done so there was a powerful feeling that whatever had been pursuing him was no longer there. Edward began to talk a little. He looked forlornly into the basket, which was almost empty. The blackberries had fallen out while he was running. Just up ahead there seemed to be a widening of the path into an area of close-cropped grass, overshadowed by an oak. He would sit down there a while. He could see things coming more easily, if they came. Very cautiously he approached the spot, looking around and listening for the least whisper of the dead man. It was a relief to find a place not cramped and crowded in by vast bramble bushes. There was a bit of space here, a bit of air. He sat beneath a tree, and as he did so, he realised why the grass was as short as it was. Rabbits. It could easily have been a rabbit in the undergrowth. He still had no evidence that there was any dead man. Yet it was just the sort of thing likely to happen. If he was to gain a false sense of security, dismiss it all like a logical adult, the dead man really would creep up and grab him. That was exactly what would happen. He was not going to be fooled. He knew now it was the dead man, and he knew he had to keep vigilant. He was not entirely sure he recognised this place. No, that was stupid. He would have had to have gone past it before, and there were no paths leading off elsewhere as far as he knew. Yet he must somehow have strayed onto a path he never realised was there. He had no idea where he was. He was completely lost. He could climb the tree, of course, and see from there where he was. He stumbled to his feet and searched eagerly for a foothold, looking up into the twisted branches of the oak. It was a bat. He was sure it was a bat, and when he knew that it was not, it was too late. Something that had been squatting on the branches above his head now fell heavily upon him. The skin was the colour of stale, coagulated cream. Its eyes were without eyes, like the crow's hung up. Its arms were thin as bones and covered in a glutinous slime. The coat had given the illusion of wings. Emaciated fingers were in hands that squeezed round his throat. There was an overpowering smell of puppies left in rain barrels, the flesh smeared and spread like fish paste on his face. He struggled for a while until his eyes began to glaze and bulge. He wheezed, coughed, and tried to speak. "You're not real," he gargled thickly. "My mother made you up to frighten me." And his darkening tongue began to poke rudely from between his teeth, purple as a very ripe blackberry.